There was a lot of news yesterday around the NHL and one interesting matchup we want to talk about as well. But let's start with what we got yesterday, the early reports in the morning, and then it was confirmed later in the afternoon that Jim Montgomery is out as the Boston Bruins head coach. You got to look here at his all-time coaching record. This is a guy who wins a heck of a lot more than he loses. And you look at that record down a little bit lower on the graphic, Frank, his record with the Bruins is absolutely sparkling, but the lifeless start to the year ended up being too much.
Yeah, 184 games coached with the Boston Bruins and 41 losses in regulation, 715 winning percentage. And I think this is when you start to see reaction from the coaching fraternity. You see Craig Berube this morning addressing it with Toronto. He had Jim Montgomery on his bench as an assistant in St. Louis for a couple years. He said, this one hurts. It's a tough business. He said, I feel for coaches all the time, but I take this one a little bit personal. And I got multiple messages from current NHL head coaches who basically said, man, what a business. It doesn't matter how the players play, where the reaction or blame gets placed. It's never typically on the management or president or front office. It always ends up being the coach's head to roll. And just consider some perspective here. I'm not saying everything that happened this season with Jim Montgomery was perfect, but it's 2024. And so 2023 and 2022, there's 3 finalists each year for the Jack Adams. All 6 from 2022 and 2023 have now all been fired. All of them are gone. Good night. See you later. You are now working for another team. How's that work? How does a 715 winning percentage, how's that not enough? And I think maybe we should have seen the writing on the wall a little bit. The fact that Montgomery had averaged essentially 120 some points over his first 2 years with the Boston Bruins and didn't have an extension heading into this season. So in a lot of ways, it kind of felt like this is untenable. There's tons of noise about the coach, lifeless starts. He's essentially gone after all of the big name pieces, whether it was a discussion with Brad Marchand on the bench or being critical of David Pastrnak in the playoffs, or now most recently saying something about Jeremy Swayman and the goaltending. Look, a lot of things have gone wrong in Boston this season. Still just 8-9-3, still 2 or 3 wins away from second or third place in the division. And yet we've got a coaching change. Sometimes feels cruel, and in a lot of ways feels like they got the wrong guy.
Yeah, absolutely. It also is interesting to go look at the previous Jack Adams winners and see how many of them end up losing their job within 2.5 years. Like, being the coach of the year does not give you any sort of job security, but that's the era we're in right now. Like, remember when we talked with Ty Anderson, like Jim Montgomery was a top 10 tenured coach in the league, and he had barely, it feels like just yesterday he was even hired. It is wild, Frank.
And look, I'm still a believer in the Boston Bruins through all of this, which is crazy. Do you think that Jeremy Swayman is going to continue to play at an 880 something clip this year? I personally don't. I think he's much better than that. This Bruins defense core is better than that. Their offense is going to somehow find a way to get out of this funk in which their most productive line has been their 4th line. All of those things probably will change at some point in time. And look, at the end of the day, was the coaching change justified? I'm not certain, but I can tell you that the Bruins are better than what they've shown.
Yeah,
in saying that.
Shout out to Rich Keefe out in Boston, who is way ahead on this one, as you pointed out, Frank. Joe Sacco takes over on an interim basis. Do you think this will be something that lasts through the season, or is Boston looking?
Well, he's certainly going to get a pretty decent sized runway. I don't know that it's fair to say yet that he's going to last the season, but they want to give him every opportunity to earn the position. This is someone who has 4 years of NHL coaching experience. He's a Boston native, and he spent the last 10 plus seasons on the Bruins bench. So he's been around. He's been through multiple different coaches now and regimes. And this past summer, he was elevated from assistant coach to associate, which not just comes with the bump in title, but also very likely a bump in pay. So look, Sacco is someone that they want to see get an opportunity here to see if he can take the ball and run with it. And if not, then they'll address the situation.
Let's talk about what's coming up next. And listen, we've talked a ton of Boston Bruins this week. They have been the flavor du jour. But on Montgomery specifically, Frank, he was a to use the term, lame duck head coach, right? No contract extension in place. Could he be a guy who maybe tries to get back into the game really quick and maybe doesn't do what some other fired coaches do, where they kind of say, hey, I'm sitting back for the year. I know I got my paycheck coming in for the next couple of seasons. I'm in no rush. Do you think there would be a market for Montgomery? Could there even be another team out there who's going like, ooh, we like that guy, maybe even more than our current guy?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of a few teams right off the hop. I'll give you the Anaheim Ducks. I'll give you the St. Louis Blues. I'll give you, I don't know, pick another team in the league that's got some developing to do. Because I actually think, as good of a coach as Jim Montgomery has been, he's a really good teacher and a good developer. And so I think he'd be really well suited in an environment like that, where, look at Anaheim. It's kind of devolved to the point where in some ways it's a really toxic situation. We'll talk trade targets in a minute, but look at the start that Trevor Zegras is off to this year. They've essentially neutered his confidence and cut it off. That's really disappointing. There's a guy who was a mid-60s point player. Look at the lack of energy that the Ducks have. Look at the Blues. I think they, not a knock on Drew Bannister, but this team certainly doesn't look like one that's taking a step in the right direction. So where do you go what about Detroit? Are they any different with some of the young pieces that they have? And Derek Lalonde has seemingly been on the hot seat for a while now. The Red Wings are essentially 1 point away from being in dead last place in the division in a year in which they're supposed to take a step forward in year 6 of the Yzer plan.
Yeah, and that was kind of my next question was, sometimes we do see this little bit of a domino effect where, okay, Boston's made their coaching change. Does it turn up the temperature anywhere else? Do Red Wings fans in that market start going, whoa, they're ahead of us in the standings and they're willing to go this route? I mean, you mentioned Anaheim, who's struggling to piece things together here, although they are on a 3-game heater. Is there anywhere in specific? I guess we kind of touched on it, but do you think that's true, I guess, that the temperature now is cranked up in some of these markets?
Yeah, I do, because whenever there's a really good coach that's available, some GM somewhere starts to get an itchy trigger finger. Mm-hmm. And I truly believe that it's up to Jim Montgomery when he decides to work again, because he's going to be given a bunch of different opportunities and cracks here.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Saravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.